Funciona, ¿no? Sí. Pues nada, buenos días a todos. Encantada de estar aquí con vosotros y me encanta ver tantas caras conocidas entre el público. Y nada, yo voy a empezar con unas palabras, que son las siguientes. Los gobiernos y las organizaciones no pueden solucionar los problemas sociales y ambientales por sí solos. Necesitamos la colaboración de las empresas y el liderazgo del sector empresarial para abordar estos desafíos de manera efectiva. Estas palabras las escribió John Elkington hace más de 10 años en la Harvard Business Review. Parecen ahora absolutamente, muy contextualizadas, no responden totalmente a lo que es necesario a día de hoy, pero en aquel momento no era así. En aquel momento el rol de las empresas como creadoras de valor compartido en la sociedad no estaba tan consolidado. Las estrategias de responsabilidad corporativa y de sostenibilidad, tal y como las entendemos hoy, pues no eran tan habituales y, de hecho, Naciones Unidas nos había marcado los objetivos de desarrollo del milenio que daban ese rol exclusivamente a los Estados. Con lo cual, John Elkington desde siempre ha tenido una visión rompedora, una visión adelantada a sus tiempos y una visión que para los DIRSE ha sido absolutamente vital para ayudarnos a permear esa responsabilidad corporativa en las organizaciones. Seguro que no tengo que recordar a muchos de vosotros que conceptos como la triple cuenta de resultados o Planet, Profit y People pertenecen a John Elkington, con lo cual para nosotros es una absoluta referencia. Hace algunos meses nos pusimos a soñar en grande y con la inestimable ayuda de Isabel Roser pensamos, oye, ¿y si invitamos a John Elkington a que tenga algún rol en nuestro evento de celebración? Y así lo hicimos, con lo cual nos pusimos en contacto con ellos, con su equipo y aceptaron la invitación encantados. Nos felicitaron por la trayectoria de la entidad y a partir de ahí, grabaron un vídeo en el que John Elkington nos deja mensajes relevantes. Sin más, os invito a que lo escuchéis y que saquemos conclusiones de ellos. Muchas gracias.
Hola, buenos días. I'm John Elkington. I'm talking to you from my home in London, but I work for an organization called Volance. ESG, environmental, social and governance thinking and investment is very much at the forefront of all of our minds these days. But you catch me just as I'm finishing off a new book, my 21st. And one of the conclusions in that book, where I look back over 50 years of my professional life to date, and then 15 years into the future, is that the next 10 to 15 years will see more change, both positive and negative, than the last 50 years put together. One of the questions that I've been asked almost more than any other is, am I optimistic or am I pessimistic? Now, the mood varies depending on the day, but I was born an optimist. If you were not optimistic that we could make progress over time, you wouldn't be able to survive in a profession like this. But I'm optimistic now for a different reason, which is that I think we've now left change for so long that it's going to come through very, very fast indeed. So we've been focusing on incremental processes of change. That is now going exponential. And Hemingway once talked about a world in which things went gradually, then suddenly. That's the world in which we live. We've left systemic change for so long, we now have to do it in a very, very short order, which is why, again, I say that the next 10 to 15 years are going to see much more change than the last 50. One question that people working in the ESG and sustainability spaces often have to ask themselves is, how do we know if we're making real progress? And that was raised for me the other day when Mattel, the American toy company, released the latest version of its Barbie dolls. Some of you may have seen them. And there were 4 different characters portrayed. The first one was the Chief Sustainability Officer. Wasn't that extraordinary that that role now is being picked up in dolls for girls? The second one was a wildlife specialist. The third one was a renewable energy engineer, and so it went. I think this is interesting, if not wildly exciting, but it does raise the question of whether chief sustainability officers are enough to deliver the sort of progress that we now need. And I think the answer is they're a stepping stone, they're part of the story, they're part of the answer, but we really need to continue our work trying to engage with CEOs and chief financial officers and chief investment officers, chief risk officers, these sorts of people. So thank you, Mattel. A useful boost along the journey, but a lot further to travel. So the next image I want to show you is of a cartoon that was done for me back in 1991 by one of the Financial Times' best cartoonists, and he still is, Ingram Penn. And what it shows is a boardroom table, and around that boardroom table you'll see some of the standard roles, the CEO, the Chief Financial Officer, and so on. But you also see some rather unusual figures. So one of them is the fish in a business suit, and that is basically a director, if you like, representing the natural world, the environment, the future. In the middle you have a woman who is very clearly from the global south, poorer, representing the dispossessed, the disadvantaged. And then at the right-hand side, you have the robot. And at the time, back in the early 1990s, that was slightly intended as a joke, in the sense that who would ever have a robot around a boardroom table? And yet, in 2014, the first expert system was appointed to a board in Hong Kong. And now you have companies like Patagonia and Hub Culture, in Patagonia's sense, basically saying that the Earth is the only shareholder in that multi-billion-dollar company. And in the case of Hub Culture, they announced in Davos at the beginning of 2023 that they were appointing the Atlantic Ocean to their board. Now, in a way, these are games that people will play. But again, this is an example, or these are examples of the sorts of characters, the sort of interests, the sort of agendas that I had in that cartoon beginning to pop up at board level. The other thing that the cartoon reminds me of is the very early days of what I called the triple bottom line, which dates back to 1994. In 1995, I came up with the slightly more popular term, people, planet, profit, or prosperity. And the reason I raise that is that in 2018, I did the first ever product recall of a management concept. I didn't say that. Harvard Business Review, who published the piece, told me that that was the case. And the reason I did it was not simply because I thought that the triple bottom line was needing a certain amount of servicing, and I did, but I felt that it was time to really challenge the view that whether it's ESG or the triple bottom line, all you needed to do was trade off between different forms of value: economic, social, environmental, governance, and so on. And my point was, you need to integrate all of these, whether it's in your strategy, whether it's in your business model, in everything that you do. Interesting, there was a certain amount of pushback when I did the product recall. Some people like to believe that was the end of the story. It wasn't, it isn't. You now have over 6,000 B corporations around the world chartered formally around the triple bottom line. So this was just trying to say to us all, let's just stand back for a moment, take a breath, and think about what are we really trying to achieve here? Are we making progress in the way that we had hoped? My view is we were making progress, but not yet at the level that we need to make it, which is around system change. And I'll come on to that in a moment. The reason for being here, just round the corner from my home at Barnes Village Pond, is that this is one of the areas nearby that are in the process of being regenerated, with wildlife being brought back, and the mix of people and wild animals. I think it's immensely exciting. This is a small-scale regeneration project. Question, how do we do this on a much bigger scale globally? In 2020, I came out with a new book called Green Swans. The idea was that we were moving from incremental to potentially exponential solutions. But at the same time, it talked about the need to move from responsibility as a framing mechanism for what business was doing, to resilience firstly, and then to regeneration. And this diagram shows that, I hope, relatively clearly. Part of the reason is that if you're aiming for resilient systems, the best way to achieve that is to regenerate them, whether they're economic, social, or environmental. One of our favorite clients is based, headquartered in Spain, and that's Acciona, the infrastructure and renewable energy company. And I think what's striking about them and companies like them is that they're beginning to realize that this isn't simply about metrics, although we need new metrics. It's about new mindsets as well. And when we first went in, the company, like many others, was thinking about how could they be more responsible. So it was a responsibility framed agenda. The deeper we got in, the clearer it was that whether it was with COVID-19, whether it was the Ukrainian conflict or whatever, that resilience was becoming very much more important as a consideration for companies of all sorts. But beyond resilience, there is a regeneration agenda. And I think it's quite interesting that Acciona is one of the very early pioneers to embrace that side of the sustainability agenda, and their new strapline, regenerative by design, I think signals that very clearly indeed. People ask us, what do we mean by system change? I'll give you a couple of examples. So, for example, we've been working with the legal industry in Europe mainly, because lawyers help define and police the regulations, the rules, the standards that apply to business. And increasingly, lawyers are starting to think about really challenging questions, existential questions about whether it's appropriate for them to prosecute climate activists on behalf of governments, just to take one example. At the same time, we've, for example, been working with the banking sector. So for several years now, with the Houses of Parliament in the United Kingdom, we've been working on something called Bankers for Net Zero, working with the retail banks to work out how they better support small and medium-sized enterprises as they drive towards net zero climate emissions. And I think we need many more of these systemically focused initiatives, not just focusing on individual companies, because in a sense you can clean up a given company, but when you've cleaned it up and you put it back into today's markets, it's a bit like cleaning up a fish and putting it back into polluted waters. A final example of systemic change is what's happened in the United States of America under the Biden administration, where the Inflation Reduction Act has suddenly brought a completely different scale of funding to areas like clean technology and renewable energy, to the point where the European Union and others are now scrambling to work out whether they subsidize their green industry sectors in the same way. This is a government and country starting to play the systemic game, and I think we will see a lot more of that. So this is not saying that corporate social responsibility or ESG investment, these sorts of things, they're all important, but they're only stepping stones towards truly systemic change. So best wishes with your conference. Again, I wish I was with you. I very much look forward to hearing what comes out of it. Anyone wants to chase me up, my email is John, John, at Volans, VOLANS. And if you want to get in touch, my email is John, John, at Volans, VOLANS.com.